tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Rosie.
I'm Jake.
And today we're going to talk to you about Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, which was a show on CBBC. I don't know the dates of it.
Well, the first series was 1989, late in the year. Second series was 1990, late in the year. And then they had a bit of a break and came back at the beginning of 1993 and the beginning of 1994 for Series 3 and 4.
It was very good, wasn't it? It was very funny and unique, and I think everybody liked it, and it was created and written by and had in it as one of the main characters Tony Robinson, who I think is an excellent actor and writer and TV personality. And what it was a sort of anachronistic, amusing parody of the Robin Hood legend. And as you can work out from the title, even if you don't know, Maid Marian is the one who's in charge, and then some other ideas are sort of subverted, like Robin Hood is actually a bit of a weedy, rubbishy, silly arse. And other ideas are pretty much what they were, like King John is a tyrant who goes around taxing all the peasants.
It's a very clever title, actually, isn't it? You get the basic premise just from looking at it. Maid Marian and Her Merry Men. Oh, I see. It's a Robin Hood legend with a twist by Tony Robinson. You know, the sort of thing you're going to expect. I think before the third series aired at the beginning of 1993, they must have had a bit of a drive to get interest up in the show, which had already won a BAFTA in 1989 and certainly deserved it. But I know that we didn't watch it when it was first on in 1989 and 1990, the first two series. But I do remember seeing, evidently in repeats, the end of the first series. When we watch through it, I always say, in the penultimate episode of the first series, when the song going, "He's Popular," about Robin Hood comes up, I say, oh yes, I think this is the first one I ever saw. And I also remember seeing the last episode of the first series, which is called The Whitish Knight, and it's quite good for getting the idea about turning the Robin Hood thing on its head, because you get King Richard coming back, like we've seen in the Disney Robin Hood, like we've seen in Robin Hood Prince of Thieves, which was actually made after the first series of Maid Marian, but I had seen Robin Hood Prince of Thieves before I'd seen this. And when King Richard comes back, you expect him to be, hooray, he's back, he's heroic, everything's going to be alright now. And Maid Marian turns it on his head, and he's just as bad as King John. So you get the idea of the whole show from that in many ways.
They sort of set up for that, don't they, earlier in the episode, where Robin is saying, oh, things would be better if King Richard was here, wouldn't they? And Marian says, oh, I don't know, he hasn't been in the country for however many years. Quite a lot. So Tony Robinson, I think, pointing out there that we don't really know if Richard would have been a better king than John or not, because he was never here.
Now, I don't think either of us saw any of the second series until it was all repeated in 2001. I don't know if they showed any repeats of the second series to try and excite us for the third series, or if it was just the first.
I'm certain I saw the two-part finale Rotten Rose in the 90s.
Do you know? I think I may have done as well. Perhaps we caught that before Series 3 was on. I wonder if perhaps they only showed the last two episodes of each of the first two series, and that's why we'd seen those ones in preparation for Series 3.
Yes, I'm pretty sure I didn't see Rose, who we'll tell you all about, along with the other characters, in her other episodes before I saw her introduction.
So their plan worked anyway, and they got us interested in and amused by and wanting to watch the new series of the show by the beginning of 1993. I'll tell you where else I picked it up and became interested in it, was in this supplement of the Telegraph called Young Telegraph, which our grandmother used to save for me,
I never saw it. That must have been just for you.
and it had things like stupid jokes and articles they thought young Telegraph readers would be interested in, but it had all these cartoons of Maid Marian and Her Merry Men by Tony Robinson. I'm not sure what other form these were released in, if they were in other magazines or comics, but he did like comic strip versions of many episodes or all episodes, and when the DVDs were produced about 10 years ago, he did new comics for special features, as it were, special added bonus parts of the DVD set. But I remember reading some parts of Series 3 of Maid Marian in Young Telegraph in comic strip form before it was actually on the telly. I remember watching the episode called Keeping Mum and thinking, oh, I know what's going to happen in this one. I've seen it in Young Telegraph, haven't I? They're a bit spoilery, those comic strip cartoons, really. But I guess if they were trying to hook me in for Series 3 with some repeats and some comic strips by Tony Robinson, they certainly managed, didn't they?
Well, yes, I guess they did.
And we watched Series 3, which has 6 episodes, and Rosie recorded the second lot of 3 episodes on her special tape, which we mentioned in the Animals of Farthing Wood podcast, I think, because it had 2 episodes of Farthing Wood on it as well.
Yes, and some episodes of Blind Date. It was awfully good, and Wildlife on One.
Yeah, it's a brilliant tape. And so when it came around to Series 4 the next year, 1994, we recorded that and had it on video for many, many years until the DVD came and know it extremely well indeed. We also recorded in the Christmas of 93 the Christmas special, which isn't a Christmas special as such, it's a special for Christmas, Maid Marian and Much the Minimart Manager's Son,
where you get an idea of the anachronistic humour.
And then we watched it when they repeated it in early 2001, and that was the first time we'd seen the first episode of all, and then they didn't show the rest of the first series, which I thought was a bit disappointing. But then they showed all of Series 2 and 3, which was very good to see, and then they showed 5 of the 7 episodes in Series 4. They didn't show one that referenced Linda McCartney because she'd recently died, and they didn't show the final episode, Voyage to the Bottom of the Forest, which is a bit weird anyway, and it was the end of the week with the one before, so they didn't want to bother tacking it onto a new Monday, and quite frankly, I think new viewers weren't missing anything. But I think from this showing, they probably decided, oh yes, it is worth releasing it on DVD, because the DVDs were around not long after that. So, thank goodness that happened. Now we can watch it all whenever we like. Now, are we going to discuss the characters as a way of discussing the show?
Yes, I think so. We could say which characters are in which series. I think it's really only 2 new ones who get introduced, isn't it? The first series has got Maid Marian, Robin Hood, the 3 other merry men, and for the baddies, Prince John or King John, I might call him either one at any one time, he's sort of both, isn't he? The Sheriff of Nottingham, and Gary and Graham, the 2 Norman knights, guard sort of people, and the main peasants, Snooker and Gladys, who make it through the series, and also Little Girl. There's always a child, girl in fact, and in the first series she's just called Little Girl, and she's played by Kelly Bright,
who of course moved on to the Upper Hand directly after 1989, so why we didn't see any more of her after the first series.
She was in Teabag too at one point, wasn't she?
Yes, I guess she'd already done Teabag and then Maid Marian, and then was put on a grown-up show for the Upper Hand. For this early Teabag she did.
So Teabag was her big break. Funny that we're going into detail about her first, but she's quite amusing, isn't she, when she's got a little amusing scene to do. I thought she was quite good as Little Girl.
I liked it when she said, oh no, not another double glazing salesman, which is a good example of an anachronistic piece of humour that we recognise as something amusing from our own lives at the time.
So let's get back to the main characters now. Shall we start with Marian, who's played by Kate Lonergan. She's introduced by coming to Worksop, which is the poor town location in order to sell her pet tadpole Edwina, which I think is one of the things that perhaps wasn't quite as amusing as they were hoping. The main thing that I think one remembers about Marian is that she's incredibly bossy, and she runs this gang of what she calls freedom fighters, which I suppose they are, by bossing them about and being an awful nag, which Kate Lonergan does very well and makes quite amusing. And while she's doing this, she gets into an altercation with the Sheriff of Nottingham, played by Tony Robinson, and ends up running off with Robin of Kensington, which is very funny, isn't it? Who's her hostage, but the sheriff doesn't care about him. He cares about getting his blood on King John's underpants, which Robin has been making. And I remember seeing a clip on YouTube of Tony Robinson accepting the BAFTA, and the clip they showed of an example of how amusing the show is and sort of what it's like was Marian saying, "See what he has in his hand, King John's underpants," and all that kind of thing, and everyone at the BAFTA Awards was chuckling away. So I guess that works on some people.
It's interesting, the humour in the first series. It's not quite as anachronistic as it will be later. You get references to, like, McDonald's and Brother Cliff the Singing Monk, Cliff Richard, that sort of thing. But they do start it with turning the tournament, the Golden Arrow, into like the darts match with the darts commentary and the darts close-up. So you get the seed sown of all the anachronistic humour coming in, but it is quite unique in its feel, as first series of things often are. I think it's a shame if they decided it wasn't as good or as like the other series to repeat it all in that run in 2001. Quite disappointed in that, and was therefore very pleased to be able to buy it on DVD. Perhaps that was their plan all along.
Yes, I do think it is very good, the first series. It hasn't quite found its feet yet, so perhaps it isn't as good, arguably, I don't know. But Robin, anyway, is played by Wayne Morris, and nowadays, if you see him, he'll be calling himself Adam Morris, won't he?
Yes, that's right.
And he's very good fun. He's got a very posh accent and sort of is rather what nowadays we call metrosexual, don't we? Sort of groomed man who likes fashion and stuff, and he's a very reluctant freedom fighter, outlaw, and only doesn't go back to Worksop because he accidentally hits Gary on the head while they're coming to find him and Marian. Certainly the first series, and I think the second series, but I think they're over it by the third, is a sort of mistaken danger and enemy to Prince John. He gets himself this reputation from the things that Marian's done, and he's happened to be there, and they're all frightened of him, and they run into him in the woods and go, it's Robin Hood, and Tony Robinson leaps into Gary O'Graham's arms and that kind of thing. And in the meantime, Robin's completely oblivious to all this. And so, like, for instance, he's inviting them back to their hideout for pancakes, and the sheriff thinks that they're getting kidnapped, terrorised, and all that kind of thing.
And then what Robin does like, as his reputation as the great outlaw Robin Hood is cemented, is all the fame and celebrity and attention brings him from, like, the people of Worksop and his fan club of girls. And he likes to have that fame and attention without really having to do anything for it. One thing I remember you reading about Maid Marian had someone saying, oh, well, he's not Robin Hood, he's Robin of Kensington. And you were saying this person is stupid, because in this universe, Robin Hood is Robin of Kensington. Like in other universes, the usual story is Robin of Locksley or Earl of Huntingdon or something like that. And we see how he gets to be called Robin Hood in this universe by a complete accident, where Marian goes to him, Robin Hood? Pull your hood up, is what it means. So that person obviously hadn't watched it properly or understood properly, and shouldn't be allowed to watch Maid Marian at all.
Yes, what it's really setting out to do, I think, that you don't get from the third and fourth series so much, and I only realised when we saw the first series, is that it's saying well, here's how we ended up with the legend that we have, but it's not really what you think. And one of those things is that Robin is Robin of Kensington and didn't really mean to be a great hero at all. So to say that he's not Robin Hood, he's mistaken for Robin Hood, or sort of like Brian in the Life of Brian or something like that, or whatever they're trying to say, that's a load of rubbish, isn't it? The other merry man who you can indisputably say is directly inspired by a real one is Little Ron. And I guess that's trying to do the same sort of thing, saying, well, Little John wasn't really a giant with the ironic nickname Little John at all. He was and I'm not sure what word people would be comfortable with, but I'll use the one I'm comfortable with. He was a dwarf, a fellow with dwarfism, called Little Ron. And I guess him being very aggressive and hitting everybody with his club and being violent and this very skilled or perhaps lucky fighter led to the reputation of him being 7.5 foot tall and incredibly strong and all that kind of thing.
Just in case you don't get that he's Little John immediately, he's guarding this bridge in the first episode and challenging everyone to fight him to cross it. And of course, in those days, all the viewers would have known that that's the very famous story about Robin Hood and Little John meeting. But perhaps they don't know that nowadays, what the state of the modern world.
Played by Mike Edmonds, I forgot to mention. Sorry, Mike.
And we mentioned him in our Narnia podcast, because of course he played Mr. Owl in The Silver Chair on the BBC.
Which we could tell straight away because of his voice. Didn't have to wait for the cast for that one because we knew his voice very well from Maid Marian. One of the things that I find very memorable about him is that he sits in the child's seat in a trolley when he and Marian are in workshop. I used to rather like that because I used to do that not too many years ago when we used to watch it. And I thought, oh yes, that's funny because it's anachronistic, although I didn't know that word, and because Little Ron is small, he goes in the trolley, and I just used to think that was funny. I don't know, maybe you can't do that now, maybe it's offensive.
You probably wouldn't get away with that nowadays, even though it's just intended to be a bit of anachronistic fun. It would be taken all the wrong ways nowadays, as things are.
Then there are two other merry men, and I hope you won't mind me telling everyone that when we were little, you did used to insist that they were directly based on actual Robin Hood gang members, because you used to like to be able to match everything up, didn't you?
As we said in the Blazing Dragons podcast, that's why I was annoyed with characters such as Sir Hotbreath.
I'm just wondering which order to talk about them in. Neither one is better or more important, I don't think, so I'll tell you in the order that I think of them. First of all, I thought of Barrington, because the other day we watched Red Dwarf, and Danny John Jules is in that, and Danny John Jules played Barrington, who was a Rasta merry man. And to begin with, he's kind of a narrator as well, and they do music in Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, and he used to do pretty much all of it by rapping and narrating the story.
I was wondering if that role as narrator did continue to some extent throughout, and you don't really see it much after the first series, but in some ways you do. In some ways Barrington's still a kind of omniscient narrator sometimes. There's the one in series 4 I thought of where Guy of Gisborne, who we mentioned in our last podcast, we'll talk more about soon, is going to be the new king, and Barrington's doing this song to celebrate with the people of Worksop and leading them in this dance routine, and then when the baddies turn up to continue the plot, Barrington's just not there anymore. He wasn't really part of the scene. He was this force from outside the continuity of the show, getting things moving.
Yeah, so he still sometimes does do that, and he does a recap song in Much, doesn't he?
That's right.
But in the first series, they'll be in the middle of something, and I can think of one time this happened, actually, in the first episode. Perhaps he doesn't do it often, but they're in the middle of something, and then he just, turns to the camera and starts doing this rap to remind us what's going on.
Yes, he's quite omniscient as a narrator in Much, isn't he? He does the Much song at the beginning and explains all about Much, and then in the actual story, later, he says to Maid Marian, this much as if he doesn't know anything about him. So there we go, he doesn't maintain that dual role to some extent.
Sometimes he does dancing too. He's what they call a triple threat in stage school. He can act, sing, and dance.
And as everybody knows, Danny John and Jules' original and great passion is dancing. And that's why he does it at every given opportunity on Maid Marian and Red Dwarf. And I'm sure what he liked about Maid Marian was plenty of opportunity for dancing and lots of opportunity for singing, which is another of his great passions. But he's also a very amusing comedy performer. As we'll say in our Red Dwarf podcast next year, manages to squeeze a lot of humour out of material in Red Dwarf that doesn't deserve to have any humour squeezed out of it.
A bit like Melissa Joan Hart.
Yes.
So that's Barrington, and then the other merry man is Howard Lew Lewis as Rabies. And if you did grow up in the 80s and the 90s, you probably saw Howard Lew Lewis playing large, slightly gormless or incredibly gormless and thick characters, which is very much what Rabies is.
We saw Howard Lew Lewis live in pantomime once. I'm sure he was terribly amusing. And he was very famous for playing a character in a sitcom called Brushstrokes about paint and decorate, a character called Elmo in that. That was the one I think people associated him with at the time as the character in that vein you were describing.
Yes, I vaguely remember that panto, and actually I saw him in an episode of Brushstrokes on UK TV Gold or something within living memory. And I also remember seeing him in an art show like, Bitzer and Heartbeat and Art Attack and that kind of thing, where he was kind of presenting but kind of playing a character and he was too stupid to understand the colour wheel and that kind of thing.
He's a very amusing performer, I think, with his thick, deadpan style.
Yes, I don't know if he has a naturally stupid and thick expression or if he puts it on, but he can seem incredibly thick, and then if you read about him, you learn he's actually a very intelligent man.
Yes, he's quite different, I was thinking, in The Blackadder, where perhaps he first worked and met Tony Robinson, worked with and met Tony Robinson, when he's being Mr. Applebottom. We'll podcast about Blackadder next year as well, by the way. He's being a cross-violent farmer sort of character, quite different.
I guess he's also being a sort of yokel, isn't he? He wouldn't suit a kind of higher-class posh character, would he? And he was making me laugh as Rabies quite a lot when we were watching the DVD, wasn't he?
There's nothing wrong with playing and acting to your strengths if it's a particular type. You should revel in that, as Howard Lew Lewis has always done.
A very good episode for Rabies is that Series 4 episode you were mentioning, where they have a reference to Linda McCartney.
Yes, it's called The Wise Woman of Worksop, but that premise very quickly peters out, and it's not a very good title for the episode, really.
Everyone's appearance is altered, everyone who's eaten this certain cake, and Rabies finds himself in a position to pretend to be a pixie and trick Guy of Gisborne in order to rescue Robin and Marian from the castle. And this is the 4th series, and we've seen Rabies, as Barrington once put it, not having a clue what's going on. Yeah, what is going on, he says at that point, about halfway through the episode. And then he says, when everyone's saying, oh no, what are we going to do? He says, don't worry, I've got it all worked out. And he does this really very clever plan to trick Guy into giving all the baddies sleepy cake. And he sings a song to go with his plan, so Howard Lew Lewis does some singing there. It's him, not one of the singing troupe. And then it's very funny when everything's going fine and Guy's going to walk off with the cake and he says to Rabies, would you like a piece? And Rabies goes, oh yeah, please. And you're thinking, wow, he's come up with this whole plan, he knows exactly what's going on. And then he's forgotten he's not supposed to eat cake. I thought that one was worth talking about in some detail because it's very good and very different for Rabies.
And that's where we get Pixie Paul and his little wife Linda, who is Linda McCartney. And we've already had earlier that Rabies, after eating another sleepy cake, looks like Paul McCartney. That leads to Gladys saying one of the lines I particularly like. It's Paul McCartney, and she's fangirling over him, and she goes, I've got all your records, even the really bad ones. And I say, yes, if you like someone, a singer or a TV program or something, you want it all, don't you? Even the really bad ones, and there are bound to be really bad ones to have in your collection.
Yes, and I think Paul McCartney, some of them with the Beatles and some of them not, quite famously did some really bad songs. Since we've just talked about Gladys a bit, perhaps we better talk about her and Snooker. Gladys is the wise woman of Worksop in that one episode, and she's an elderly woman played by Hilary Mason, and it's difficult to explain sort of what she does, really. She just does whatever needs doing by the peasants in a very amusing way, and she says funny things that might seem a bit random, like thinking that Rabies is Paul McCartney, and then she goes up and snogs him, doesn't she?
Yes, that's right. Gladys and Snooker running this Chinese takeaway together at one point. They just kind of do what needs doing around Worksop.
And she's serving food in this place where they're having karaoke night and giving Marian food and a drink, and Marian says, you haven't got any scratchings, have you, Gladys? And she says, scratchings, and then scratches her arm over the drink and bits of skin fall off. So that's another thing they do, sort of disgusting, impoverished people stuff. It's quite satirical, actually. They're living with poor hygiene, so they have scabs and diseases and things, and they also don't have enough to eat and drink. And actually, the whole thing is introduced, isn't it, by Barrington doing this rap about mud and how the peasants have to eat mud.
I like it when Marian goes to buy some mud, and she says, and I'll have it off the bone, if I may, which always reminds me of our grandmother buying ham or something like that. It rings true, the humour.
I like Raby's raffle, which is also in that first scene I was talking about, where the prizes are, one of them is bottles of mud, and there's another one, some sort of mud, and then the first prize is a holiday for two. He's telling the sheriff. The sheriff goes, where? And he goes, in some mud, which I think is very funny. Holiday for two in some mud. You don't really need to win that, do you? You could just go and have it anyway. And then Snooker does the same sort of thing, and he's played by Robin Chandler. When you haven't seen the first series, you might wonder, why is he called Snooker? I guess they think it's a funny name. It's fairly in keeping with the show, but is there any particular reason? And it turns out that there is. He's in the Pancake Day episode, it is, isn't it, where the sheriff suggests to King John that he invents something and gets all the equipment for him to try and invent the game that we know as snooker. And he's been calling Snooker Stinker the entire time, and we only find out at the end that his name is Snooker, and he goes off with all the balls and cues and green cloth and stuff to invent snooker. And if they hadn't particularly liked him, he wouldn't need to stick around after that. He could just be off inventing snooker, couldn't he? But he does stay around right up until the end of the series, again doing funny things like running the Chinese takeaway and having a spaghetti house, which is a house made of spaghetti, and begging the sheriff not to eat it.
And then in one episode, when he needs to be, he's the driving examiner.
And he's very funny too. He has some amusing lines, like when the sheriff's going to build what is based on the Channel Tunnel, because that was going on at the time, wasn't it? But it's only to Scunthorpe. They're all complaining about the Scunthorpians coming over to Worksop and saying they eat slugs and snails, and then there aren't any left for us. And when Walter is released from prison in the castle, Snooker's his old friend and all happy to see him, and they're pleased to see each other and celebrating, and then Snooker goes, well, where is it then? My Phillips screwdriver.
I haven't got your Phillips screwdriver.
Yeah, it's very anachronistic and exactly the sort of thing that happens when you've seen your friend after a while.
That's exactly what happens. Snooker's doing this rousing speech to the rabble in the Tunnel Vision one about the Channel Tunnel. The Scunthorpians will come over here, eating our mud, marrying our chickens. It's just very funny at that sort of thing. When I read the episode list on the internet and I saw that the third episode ever was a game called John, I thought, that's where Snooker comes in and why he's called Snooker, and indeed that is the case. The other little girls are Nettle in Series 2, and you look her up and you find she was 18 probably when they filmed it, and yeah, she looks quite mature. So she was probably too old to come back and play the young girl a couple of years later. I like the bit where she's going off with a friend in the playground, going off with Marian and ignoring Rose, and Nettle turns round and goes to Rose, she doesn't want to talk to you, like that. That's her best bit, I think.
Yes, and then Series 3 has two girls, actually, Chickweed and Hayley. Really, Hayley's main purpose is to be sick when there's a spaceshipy thing in the sky, so they can call it Hayley's Vomit. She's also involved in another one, isn't she? I can't remember now.
She's also in the driving test one, just incidentally.
And also there is Chickweed. She has an appearance at the Chinese takeaway. Robin's going and trying to take her food, and she says, "Push off, creep," and shoves him.
She's also in the first episode of that series, hitting King John with her dolly. You ain't having my dolly.
Yeah, so the point of her in that series is to be very aggressive and start attacking people. Not without justification. King John's trying to nick her stuff, Robin's trying to take her food. And then she continues into Series 4, where she's got her Mr. Tiggywinkle, which is a lavatory brush with a radish for a nose made to look like a hedgehog, and has got a little to do with the plot of the episode, Robin the Bad it's called, where Robin's double, Clem Cosner, very funny, is going around pretending to be Robin, annoying everybody, and he, "Hold the head off my Mr. Tiggywinkle."
Yes, there's a couple of references to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves in Series 3, because of course it was released between Series 2 and 3 of Maid Marian. Robin Hood, Prince of Weeds. Can I be in it, do you reckon, says Raby. It's a big joke being that he was in it as one of the merry men, Howard Lulus.
A sort of gormless-looking one.
Yeah, but then they do continue with another Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves reference with Clem Cosner there. And good on them, good on Tony Robinson for doing it.
So that leaves the baddies, doesn't it? We've already mentioned Tony Robinson is the Sheriff of Nottingham. And one thing I notice about him is that his beard, which isn't Tony Robinson's own beard, it's stick-on, gets smaller every series. I suppose if you were going to be pedantic, you wouldn't say it gets smaller between Series 1 and 2. It more sort of changes shape. But he does have a different beard in each of the 4 series, and as a rule, it gets smaller. So when we saw the first 2 series, or bits of them, on the CBBC channel, I was surprised that he didn't have a little beard like I was used to seeing him in Series 4. And Tony Robinson's very good, isn't he? I remember once seeing him on CBBC in like a documentary or interview or something, talking about making Maid Marian and saying that he wanted to play the baddie. And you can tell from his performance he really enjoys playing someone evil, threatening the peasants, going around taking all the taxes, trying to capture Robin Hood, wanting to do torture on people.
He gets to be horribly abusive at times. And then at other times he amusingly is crawling and making excuses and begging to King John. A bit like Toad Air Marshal's good character in that way, but much more comedic. But though, of course, he is threatening in his own way. We do find out his first name, his real name, is Arnold in the episode called Keeping Mum, which I mentioned before. And the only reason his first name is Arnold is so that they can do quite a long joke, which has been set up earlier in the episode, where he says he's going to become Count Arnold of Schwarzenegger. And was it really worth all that build-up? Well, maybe.
In Robin Hood Men in Tights, they have a joke where the sheriff's first name is revealed, and it's stupid, don't they? Your name is Mervyn. Marian's finding out that he's called Arnold and saying a horrid name. So it's just all generally quite amusing.
He gets to do some great lines, Tony Robinson, that he's written and thus knows how to deliver, always makes us laugh. When he's fishing for the hot water bottle that he's lost, and he's going, someone's nicked it, haven't they? People will nick anything, and he's absolutely right, they will. Anything you leave lying around, someone will nick it, which is quite useful sometimes. but annoying at other times. And when he's going, Maid Marian was nauseating as a good little child. Shall I give half my Kit Kat to the poor people, mummy? And things like that makes us laugh so much.
Yes, I always used to enjoy him when I was little. It's very accessible, covering up for some secret hammering that was going on in front of the Merryman by saying he was practicing his tap dancing, and whenever the hammering starts, he has to tap dance, and he's in the middle of a sentence, and then he suddenly has to do this long, long, long tap dance, and then he finishes the sentence, or just clear away the things, and I used to find that hilarious.
Absolutely brilliant.
Then we've mentioned as well Gary and Graham, and I guess they have pretty authentic Norman knight costumes, because if you see guards and knights and things in films such as Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, they look like Gary and Graham, and we go, oh look, there's Gary and Graham. Graham's played by David Lloyd, Gary's played by Mark Billingham, and they are sort of bebop and rocksteady fricks and fracks kind of characters, a pair of stupid baddies who go around being stupid whilst trying to obey their chief and help him to thwart the goodies.
What you notice while we're watching it quite recently, and it's true, is that Graham is slightly more on the ball than Gary, slightly, and Graham was the one who had to do the bit where he was being sinister. Gary could really have done that.
Yes, Graham's coming and saying he's going to torture them. I'm going to let you have a go on everything. Being really generally quite scary there. I don't think Gary could have done that, could he?
But they do a lot of fun scenes together, like Chuckle Brothers or Trevor and Simon having all these conversations that don't really go anywhere.
Yes, they talk absolute rubbish whilst walking along or whatever, and often the sheriff will turn around and go, "Shut up!" and that kind of thing. Gary, as you say, is a bit thicker and a bit more kind of, I don't know, weird and saying strange things, which is probably why he has the funnier name. Gary is actually a comedy name, isn't it? And Men Behaving Badly, Miranda, Goodnight Sweetheart, because it's funny when people say Gary, and if Barrington or Marion or someone addresses Gary or Graham, nearly every time it's Gary, because it's just a funny name. And then the other original baddie, of course, is King or Prince John. Prince Regent, of course, I think you could reasonably say either one, and he's played by Forbes Collins, who also was very briefly in The Blackadder, wasn't he?
That's right.
As a guy asking a monk to look after his daughter while he isn't there, and then becomes Blackadder, the monk then is seen to be seducing the daughter, possibly even raping her.
Earning his status as one of the 7 most evil people in the land, Friar Bellows.
But the point of Forbes Collins was to set that up anyway, and it wasn't the most memorable or interesting performance, so it's quite different when he's King John, and mostly what he does is shouts at the sheriff all the time. He has a lot of very funny lines as well, like that reference to My Little Pony.
If you can sell soppy plastic horses with soppy blue hair and soppy little hairbrushes to brush it with, more anachronistic humour there. He's awfully good for Collins, isn't he? Great fun. And he does some fun work as King Richard as well. Firstly seeming to be like the more traditional Sean Connery, coming back and being heroic King Richard, and then it turns out he's evil as well. And also as their sister, Queen Eleanor, mother of Guy of Gisborne. Amusing bit of drag performance there.
Yes, they say that she used to do a disgusting thing with a pencil to John in order to torture him when they were young, and then I was looking them up to see what actual siblings they had. There were about 9 of them, weren't there? If not more, and John and Eleanor, in fact, were 2 of the youngest ones, and she was a bit older than him, so she would have been in the nursery with him, tyrannising him as older siblings do. And I found out that she was Queen Eleanor, as they call her in Maid Marian, and she was Queen Eleanor of Castile. And she actually had about 9 children herself, but none of them actually was Guy of Gisborne, so that's a bit different for that universe.
Isn't she a quite close ancestor of Catherine of Aragon, you found out?
That's right.
Yes.
Isabella, Catherine's mother, is of Castile.
That's right, yes. Which was quite interesting.
Of course, they're all terribly interbred, these European royal families, aren't they? And their mother was Eleanor of Aquitaine, wasn't she?
That's right, and their father was Henry II.
So it always seemed quite likely that one of their daughters would be called Eleanor, and she was. And that's how she's been used in Maid Marian, so that's quite interesting. And as you say, a quite comic performance as her by Forbes Collins. And then speaking of Guy of Gisborne, he's introduced halfway through the second series.
Yes, it's in the 3rd episode, so he's in 2/3 of the series.
And he's played by Ramsay Gilderdale, and I was, as a youngster, quite surprised. I don't know, maybe I wasn't that young, but when I was younger anyway, I was quite surprised to learn that he hadn't always been there. I don't know why it surprised me quite as much as that. I just sort of assumed he had. But actually, it's not that surprising because he's so out there. You probably wouldn't think of him until the show was established and you knew that you could get away with a character like Guy.
Now, you see, I had an idea that he hadn't always been there. I guessed from watching the last couple of episodes of Series 1, which he's not in. And then the first few times we rewatched Series 2, I was surprised it took him until the 3rd episode to turn up, because he does seem like such a big part of the show, and he does add so much to it. He's another actor that Tony Robinson would have met on Blackadder, in this case Blackadder's Christmas Carol, where he's amusing at the end.
Yes, the kind of performance that he's doing might well have been making Tony think, oh, we need something like that in Maid Marian. So he's King John's nephew. I'm not sure what the real Guy of Gisborne was, who he was.
Yes, in Prince of Thieves, he's the sheriff's cousin. You can do whatever you want with him, really.
Some kind of noble anyway, isn't he? I guess he'd have to be off somewhere. And he's absolutely hilarious, isn't he? And what he is a spoilt child, but a 27-year-old spoilt child, and he has a whiny voice, as they say, and he has all these tantrums, and he's really silly all the time, says stupid things, has an annoying laugh.
That introductory scene to the 3rd episode of Series 2 sets him up so well, where he's all cuddled up to his mother, Forbes Collins, and he's saying he's scared to go and live with Uncle John, and his tummy's all runny, and are you sure he's old enough? She says, yes, my little Cocoa Pop, you're 27 now. And we get the idea perfectly, and it's very funny.
And we were discussing, weren't we, how Guy actually isn't really evil. He doesn't wish anybody any harm. He just wants to have a laugh, and whatever's happening, he goes along with it. And the one bit where we thought he might be a little bit evil was where they're going to put Robin in the torture machine, and he's laughing along with everybody.
Which, if you think about it, is quite anomalous for him to do that sort of evil laugh. I suppose he's just quite amused to see the torture machine going. But in other episodes, yes, he just kind of goes with it. In his first one, he joins in with Colin's Release, based on Comic Relief. Give all you can, I say. He's working against the rest of the baddies, as it were. And then in Rotten Rose at the end of Series 2, where Maid Marian and Robin Hood are at various points in the torture chamber, and Guy takes a liking to Marian and takes her out for a walk and has a nice chat with her and says, now you must lock yourself back in your cell, won't you? Oh yes, she says.
He doesn't think about the situation that she's in and the poor people are in. He's very kind of selfish and oblivious in that way, like princes sometimes are.
I like it in Rotten Rose when he sees Marian at the end and he goes, oh hello Marian, still got your bonks then? And she's like, yes I have. It's like he knew what was going on, but he wasn't really that emotionally involved.
And the other time when he kind of joins in with the goodies is where Robin's doing his very, very amusing Crystal Maze parody. And Guy's wandering about in the woods. He's been getting kidnapped by Rose pretending it's Marian, and things happen and he gets away from her. And he thinks he's been having a funny game with her, and then he finds this crystal maze, which he calls Dungeons and Dragons. oh goody, can I play, he says, and just kind of joins in with what Robin's doing, so you don't get any sense there that they're enemies. And I think when Series 3 happens, they've taken Guy's character to more extremes than he was in Series 2. He does all these long, loud, very weird monologues that not anybody could do about how you give someone a sweet and it makes them do a potty smell, and you go, who's done that potty smell, and that kind of thing. And he does this, probably not very politically correct for me to say asthmatic, it's the word I'm thinking of, this kind of when he takes a breath, and actually, when he's gasping at Marian, because he fancies her, she says, have you got asthma? Which is another thing you're probably not allowed to do nowadays, because obviously people who have asthma suffer terribly, and it's awful for them.
We compared Guy to Erpgore in the previous podcast, and in some ways he is like Erpgore. Wacky, out there, extreme, and orally, as into your ears, amusing for the young audience. And he just hits the mark where he could fall very flat and just be overly silly, but he's not. It just works so well. An interesting episode for Guy, actually, is in Series 4, and it's called The Nice Sumatran, and it's where Guy becomes king, and I did mention it briefly earlier, because King John, even though he's not the real king, has abdicated, and Guy becomes quite nasty and vindictive as the power goes through his head, and makes the sheriff and Gary and Graham do yucky things like sit in Angel Delight and jam and things, and goes to workshop to see the dirty beggary people and makes them rub mud on themselves and jump in the river and things.
I love that sequence of the sheriff and Gary and Graham are laughing and Guy's saying, oh, it's funny, isn't it? And they're saying, yes. And he goes, right, you do it then. So they rub mud on themselves and all that kind of thing, and then they jump in the river and the Guy's going, I'm the funniest king there's ever been, aren't I? I thought that was funny. Oh, and yes, they're dancing with Danny and Jules having started them off, and Guy's saying, I don't like it, stop it! And they do, and he goes, they did! Very funny laugh, he does much better than I just did it, I'm sure. That was another sequence I used to love when I was younger.
And that leads on to the kind of spelling it out for us comment about power in the hands of stupid, spoiled rich people. A Guy says they'll do anything I say now, I'm king, won't they? The sheriff says that's the feudal system for you. It's bitingly satirical.
It's good, that episode. It's one of those ones where the goodies and the baddies team up to achieve a mutual goal.
And you can tell by then that the sheriff at least knows that Maid Marian is the main one, the brains of the operation, because he finds her to team up with, and they end up using Robin's, what has been deemed stupid, scary plan to scare off Guy.
Another funny scene in that one is Guy's coronation, isn't it? I'm king, you're not sitting on the flower pot, he says. And another bit I like in that, which is rather less subtle, is the smug, vindictive look that the sheriff is giving to King John when he's come along saying he might have waited till I'd gone. A bit of more subtle acting there.
Yes, Tony Robinson, very versatile. That's reminded me that sometimes he can be a bit of a straight man and deliver a line at the end to make us go, yeah, when Guy's done his I'm King, You're Not sequence, Tony Robinson says, I can't wait for the Christmas broadcast. And he does do that at other times when King John's been shouting and stuff like that.
And then that leaves Rose, doesn't it? Who's really only recurring rather than regular. And we agree that we did see Rotten Rose before we saw Series 3, which turns out was only 2 episodes after Guy was introduced. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I had an idea that Guy had been long established before Rose ever came along, but I guess that's just because I'd seen him in lots of Series 3 and Series 4 episodes afterwards, and she wasn't in quite so many, and I knew that he had been there when she arrived.
Yes, of course, he'd done Colin's Release and Rabies in Love, where he's very funny, because he agrees to get married just because he loves chocolate spread sandwiches, which are going to be served at the wedding. And I say, well, that's a better reason than a lot of people have to get married in real life, I must say.
Yes, satire there too, about political marriage and that kind of thing. Rose is played by Siobhan Fogarty, and she's Marian's school frenemy. Sometimes they go around saying they were best friends in school, and then Marian turns around and starts saying, "Oh, but you're always stabbing me in the back," and stuff like that. And what happens in Rotten Rose is that she comes along and gets involved in this scheme to sell Marian and Robin to the baddies.
Of course, she's Robin Hood's #1 fan and wants to have him stuffed for her Robin Hood museum and stuff. She's very screwed up in many ways.
She is a totally original character. You can't even say she's a forgotten merry man like Barrington and Rabies, or a member of King John's Guard like Gary and Graham. She's just made up. I don't know if maybe they thought there ought to be another woman in it, or if maybe they thought they needed more variety of baddies, but I always thought she was a good addition. I thought she was a bit different. She's out for herself, trying to do completely different things from what the goodies and the baddies are trying to do, and bringing a bit of variety to some of the episodes.
Yes, she adds quite a lot to the show. It's not necessary, as they obviously realise, to have her around all the time, like Guy, and they didn't make overuse of her and try to force her in where they didn't need her. But then, on the other hand, they do make good use of her when she does turn up again in something like Much the Mini-Mart Manager's Son, where she's trying to conspire with Much. And in the first couple of episodes of Series 4, they find some good use for her. So yes, certainly well worth having as a recurring character.
One of the things she does is be a sales representative for a building company, or as Marian puts it, one of those people who hang around trying to flog dodgy extensions and double glazing, something like that, she says, which is very anachronistic, and she's got leaflets and that kind of thing, and she says that she wants to build a conservatory in the sheriff's house and stuff like that, which leads to the hammering of the tap dancing. It's teaming up with the sheriff to trap and capture Robin Hood. And we'd better talk a little bit more about Much the Mini-Mart Manager's Son. We keep mentioning it. It's a very funny one too, hasn't it? One of the best sequences is the peasant's plan to catch the toad monster.
Yes, when we were talking about Snooker, I was remembering this, and then we moved on, but I should think that's probably Snooker's funniest material he gets, and he does it awfully well.
Yes, I don't know if you remember those frog bath toys with the kicking legs. Much the Mini-Mart Manager's Son, who's a sort of Del boy, isn't he?
Yes.
Probably the quickest way of summing him up. Has been flogging these to the peasants, saying if you put them outside your window, it'll stop the toad monster from coming and crushing you, which is very much the sort of thing Del boy might tell you in a slightly more surreal setting than only fools and horses. And then the peasants are all worried about this toad monster, and they come up with this plan where they put up a sign directing him to free yogurt. And it's one of those really yummy ones, or is it scrummy, where they've taken the fruit out and you have to put it back in again yourself. And they've got this absolutely hilarious Muller fruit corner prop, but it's like 5 times as big as a real one. It's hilarious.
And Snooker calls it this little pot of yogurt. But it's huge.
I suspect they didn't realise in the script how big it was going to be, and then they got this massive prop and said, oh yes, let's leave it as a little pot of yogurt. Or maybe he ad-libbed it because it's so big. I don't know, but it works out very well, whatever happened. And then he's saying what the toad monster will do. He's saying even humans can't do that without making a mess all over the 3-piece suite. So he'll hop over to the window and he's hopping with this yogurt to show what the toad monster is going to do. Then he'll stick his head out, and they're going to hit him with this giant fist, which they call the Toad Crusher.
It's one of Much the Mini-Mart Manager's Son's knock-off bits of artillery that he's flogging to the merry men, the baddies, and the people of Worksoff in various different shipments. It's funny, that plan, because it relies on the Toad Monster coming in seeing the free yogurt sign, being able to read it, wanting the free yogurt, going into the hut and deciding it's too dark, taking the yogurt to the window, and then sticking his head out, which he might not really do. It's absolutely brilliant.
Hilarious, that sequence. And what's Rose up to in the meantime? She's been playing with Guy for money because he always wants someone to play with, and he doesn't give her any money, and she's after him, and she ends up using the idea of the toad monster to make everyone in the village come and batter down the castle door with the toad crusher. And all sorts of things going on. In the meantime, she thinks that she's working with March because he's gone home and taken him inside and closed the blinds, and all they say is that she's snogged him in private, but perhaps they did a bit more than that. But then he double-crosses her as well. It's quite complicated, really, isn't it? But also in that episode, you get Gavin, who's part of, or the only part, in fact, of this youth training initiative that they've got at the castle, and he wears a little Norman knight outfit like Gary and Graham.
But he's 4, my lord.
Yes, and they have his weapons, which is a picture of a scary witch to frighten the enemy, and a stickle brick that they'll think is a creepy crawly thing. And Garen's just sitting there the entire time with a slightly gormless expression, not saying anything. Someone's doing the scene around him.
And then he enjoys the bit, I'm sure, where Forbes Collins goes, "Excellent idea, young man. How would you like to paint my face too?" And then Gavin chucks the paint in King John's face. Great fun.
Yes, and then the funny thing that I used to love is at the end when things have gone wrong and King John's going to shout at him,
"Gavin, was that you?"
And he says, "I'm going to bite the heads off your Fisher-Price firemen." That's very funny, Fisher-Price firemen. And then the payoff of that is that this enormous man comes along and he's Gavin's daddy, and he's going to, beat King John up at the start. The funniest thing is the Fisher-Price fireman and King John having a go at Gavin.
It was awfully good to watch that over the Christmas of '93. I remember Kate Lonergan had already been in the broom cupboard with, I can't think who was in there by then, Andy Peters probably.
Toby Anston?
Yes, Toby Anston's perhaps, and had shown him that she'd had her hair cut for some sort of stage role she was doing, I think. She was saying, "I've had to film this new series of Maid Marian with short hair."
Actually, I found that on YouTube when we were just getting the DVDs, and I don't remember whether it was Toby Anston or not, actually, but I do remember he asked her, "Did you have to get it cut?" And she said, "Well, I was in a play, and it was a good idea to get it cut. I very much suspect she had to wear a wig for this play."
So when we saw her with her original long hair in Much, I thought, well, that's the last we'll see of that, because they've obviously filmed that with the 3rd series, and then in the new series, we'll see. It'll be Marian with short hair, but you soon get used to that, and because it's all anachronistic humour and wacky stuff going on, it doesn't matter that she's had this cool haircut for the 1190s.
It does rather transform her, I think, and I found that a little disappointing when I was younger.
Yes, I suppose we're so used to it now, because we've watched that on video so much, but it certainly does make a visual difference.
But yes, I don't mind it now.
Talking about the characters is a good way to come across everything almost we want to talk about, and I think we've pretty much done it. We mentioned singing, and they do get a group of professional singers in like the 5th episode of Series 1 to do a lot of the singing, and it's just after they've done this kind of rap or rhythmic talking, at least, about this bridge they're going to build in episode 4, and I think they decide that it might be a good idea not to have all the actors do their own singing because of that. Kate Lonergan never gets to do any singing, little Ron never gets to do any singing, and the other actors all get to do some singing, or sometimes they are miming to the professional singers instead.
Yes, people like Tony Robinson and Howard Lee Lewis and Gary and Graham, I don't think are really cut out for the kind of complicated harmonising that the singing group do, are they?
Yes, and Ramsay Gilderdale and Forbes Collins do their own little solos a couple of times, but they don't do big complicated singing. Yes, Tony Robinson does some very nice longer songs, chatting up Marian's mum and the history of work flop in the final episode, and Shove Your Hedgehog Down Your Knickers in Robin the Bad. But then when he's doing We're Going on Vacation, that's the singers, because it's this whole big flashy musical number.
Father Bloopy as well.
That's right, that's the other one like that, isn't it? And Gary and Graham turn up doing a lot of backing vocals together, and they make Gary go quite low and Graham go quite high, so they sort of harmonise.
But you can tell it doesn't fit seamlessly with four singers who have trained together for years.
But as we know, Danny John Jules is a very accomplished professional singer, and it seems that Wayne Morris did a lot of singing for the show as well. He has this very professional singing voice that he can adapt in many ways. He done his Elvis impression a couple of times, and him and Danny John Jules singing together seems to work quite well.
And he does some dancing too, doesn't he?
He does do some dancing as well. So
stage school trained, I think.
Yes, a very good all-round entertainer, obviously, Wayne or Adam Morris. It always makes me think of that advert that was on at one point for Campino, where the Campino testing team had happened to go to a shopping centre and find Wayne Morris and Heather Jones off the Queen's Nose shopping there. I thought, no, they're too well-known actors for this advert to work.
It makes me think of that time we were watching Port Boyard on the Challenge, and there was this tall, gangly teenage boy on there, and I turned to you and said he reminds me of Wayne Knight, which wasn't quite right, was it?
No, he was the opposite of Wayne Knight.
I meant Wayne Morris. So I guess that's everything.
Yes, that's the main points, and plenty of podcasts to be getting on with. Do join us again next time, which will be on New Year's Eve for our next regular podcast, and then we're going to do our 2017 update podcast in January.
After Watership Down.
Yeah. Because December's normal podcast release day would be the 31st anyway, and B, because there's going to be stuff over the new year, Watership Down principally, we might like to talk about. So join us again then for our next regular podcast on New Year's Eve, the last Sunday in December, and that will be about the franchise called The Mummy, which began with a movie in 1999. Fortunately, we can talk about it because it did. That's the Olden Days. Based on older movies, obviously. We'll be talking about those movies and the cartoon series that spun off from it.
Maybe we'll remember something about that black and white original Mummy we saw as well.
He has a cauldron like Mum-Ra, that's all I remember about him. Boris Karloff, wasn't he? So hopefully you'll join us for that, and it will be quite interesting. Until then,
good night out there.
Whatever you are.